Welcome to Dreadful Visions, where we delve into the darkest depths of horror. Don't miss out on our terrifying tales. Subscribe now and join us on our journey into the unknown.
Story 1. The Haunting of Cabin 234. Cruise ships are meant to be floating paradises. Endless buffets, beautiful ocean views, and the promise of adventure on the high seas. But not every voyage goes as planned, and sometimes, beneath the veneer of luxury and relaxation, something much darker lurks. Our first story is about a woman named Claire. Claire was a 34-year-old nurse from Boston who had saved up for years to take her dream vacation, a week-long Caribbean cruise. She had recently gone through a tough breakup and needed to get away, to clear her mind and relax. The idea of being on a ship, far from her everyday life, was just what she needed. She booked her trip on one of the largest and most popular cruise lines, known for its top-notch service and state-of-the-art amenities. Her cabin, number 234, was on one of the lower decks, nothing fancy, but it was comfortable and cozy. It was her sanctuary, a place to retreat after a day of sunbathing and exploring the ship. The first few days of the cruise were perfect. Claire spent her mornings by the pool, her afternoons exploring the various onboard activities, and her evenings dining in one of the ship's many restaurants. She even made a few friends, other solo travelers who were also looking to unwind. But on the third night, things started to change. Claire returned to her cabin after a late dinner and a couple of glasses of wine. As she unlocked her door and stepped inside, she immediately noticed something was off. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, and there was a faint, unpleasant odor, something like dampness mixed with decay. She shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just the smell of the sea. But as she lay in bed that night, trying to fall asleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The room felt colder than it should, and despite the darkness, she had the eerie sense that she was being watched. She tried to dismiss it as post-breakup anxiety, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, Claire woke up feeling exhausted. She chalked it up to a bad night's sleep and pushed the strange feelings to the back of her mind. After all, she was on vacation, and she didn't want to ruin it by dwelling on something that was probably nothing. But that night, the feeling returned, stronger than before. As she lay in bed, she began to hear faint noises, soft whispers, almost imperceptible, like someone speaking just out of earshot. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, straining to hear. But as soon as she focused on the sound, it would stop, leaving only the faint hum of the ship's engines. Claire's nerves were starting to fray. She wasn't the type to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but the strange occurrences in her cabin were beginning to get to her. She decided to mention it to one of the ship's staff the next day. When she told the cabin steward about the noises and the coldness in her room, he gave her a strange look, as if he knew something he wasn't telling her. He assured her that he would look into it and offered to move her to another cabin. But Claire declined. She didn't want to be seen as a nuisance, and besides, she figured she could tough it out. That night, the situation escalated. Claire had just fallen asleep when she was jolted awake by a loud bang. She sat up, her heart racing, and saw that the closet door had swung open on its own. Her suitcase, which she had neatly stored inside, was now halfway across the room. Panic surged through her as she realized that something was seriously wrong. She jumped out of bed and tried to calm herself, telling herself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the ship had hit a wave, causing the door to swing open. But deep down, she knew that wasn't the case. The sea had been calm all evening. Then, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and coming from inside the room. Claire froze, her breath catching in her throat. The footsteps seemed to circle the bed, then stopped at the foot of it. She couldn't see anything in the darkness, but she could feel a presence. A cold, malevolent energy that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. Claire grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, but the beam of light revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the oppressive feeling remained, as if the room itself was alive with something sinister. She couldn't stay there any longer. She grabbed her keycard and fled the cabin, not stopping until she reached the main atrium, where other passengers were still milling about. She spent the rest of the night in one of the lounge chairs, too afraid to return to her cabin. The next morning, Claire went straight to the purser's office and demanded to be moved to another room. She didn't care if she seemed crazy. She just wanted out of cabin 234. The staff complied, and she was relocated to a different deck. The rest of her cruise passed without incident, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had escaped something truly dangerous. When the cruise ended, Claire returned home, determined to put the experience behind her. But curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to do some research on the ship. What she found made her blood run cold. Years earlier, there had been a tragedy on board. A passenger, a young woman traveling alone, had been found dead in cabin 234. The circumstances of her death were mysterious, but the official report listed it as a suicide. However, rumors among the crew suggested something more sinister. Some said she had been driven to madness by something in that cabin, something that had followed her into the afterlife. Claire never booked another cruise after that, and to this day, she refuses to speak about what happened on that ship. But the memory of cabin 234 and the darkness that seemed to live within it still haunts her. She knows that some places, no matter how luxurious or inviting, harbor secrets that are better left undisturbed. Story 2. The Vanishing Passengers. Our second story takes us on a different kind of journey. One that starts with excitement but ends in inexplicable terror. This is the story of a couple, Mark and Jennifer, who embarked on a cruise to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. But what was supposed to be a romantic getaway turned into a nightmare that neither of them would ever forget. Mark and Jennifer had always dreamed of taking a cruise together. They were the kind of couple who loved adventure and exploring new places, and a cruise seemed like the perfect way to see multiple destinations without the hassle of constant travel. They chose a Mediterranean cruise, which promised stops at some of the most beautiful and historic cities in the world. The first few days were perfect. The ship was magnificent, with every possible luxury: gourmet dining, a sparkling pool, and endless entertainment. They visited ancient ruins in Greece, wandered the narrow streets of Naples, and soaked up the sun on the beaches of Spain. At night, they would return to their cabin, tired but happy, and fall asleep to the gentle rocking of the ship. But halfway through the trip, things took a strange turn. One evening, after an elegant dinner in the ship's grand dining room, Mark and Jennifer decided to take a walk on the promenade deck. The moon was full, casting a silver glow over the ocean, and the air was warm and inviting. They strolled hand in hand, talking about their future and making plans for the rest of their trip. As they rounded a corner, they saw an older couple standing by the railing, looking out at the sea. The couple seemed deep in conversation, their heads close together as they spoke in hushed tones. Mark and Jennifer smiled at them as they passed, but the older couple didn't acknowledge them. They seemed completely absorbed in whatever they were discussing. Mark and Jennifer continued their walk, eventually making their way back to their cabin. But as they settled into bed, Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was something unsettling about the older couple they had seen. She mentioned it to Mark, who dismissed it as just a fleeting feeling, and they eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning, at breakfast, Jennifer noticed the older couple again. They were seated at a table near the window, but something about them seemed different. They were dressed in the same clothes they had been wearing the night before, and they sat in silence, not touching their food. Jennifer nudged Mark and pointed them out, and he too noticed the oddness. "Maybe they're just having a bad day," Mark suggested. But Jennifer wasn't convinced. There was something almost ghostly about them, as if they were there but not really present. She couldn't shake the eerie feeling they gave her. As the day went on, Jennifer found herself looking for the couple, unable to get them out of her mind. She saw them a few more times. Once in the ship's library, where they sat side by side, staring blankly at the bookshelves, and again on the pool deck, where they sat in the shade, not speaking, not even moving. That evening, Jennifer mentioned her unease to one of the ship's crew members, a friendly woman named Maria who had been serving them in the dining room. Maria listened carefully, her brow furrowing as Jennifer described the couple. "Can you show me who they are?" Maria asked. Jennifer agreed, and after dinner, she and Mark led Maria to where they had last seen the couple, sitting in the lounge near the back, away from the crowds. But when they arrived, the couple was gone. Jennifer described them in detail, but Maria's expression grew more concerned. "I don't recall seeing anyone like that on board," Maria said, "but I'll look into it. Maybe they're just keeping to themselves." Jennifer tried to push the thoughts away, but that night, her sleep was restless, filled with disturbing dreams of the older couple, their faces pale and expressionless. She woke up several times, her heart pounding, and each time, she had the inexplicable feeling that someone was watching her. The next morning, the ship's captain made an announcement over the intercom. A couple had gone missing, an older couple who hadn't been seen since the night before. The description matched the couple Jennifer and Mark had been seeing. The captain assured the passengers that a search was underway, and the ship's crew was checking every cabin, every corner of the ship. Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. She and Mark immediately went to the purser's desk to report what they had seen. The crew took their account seriously, but when they reviewed the security footage from the promenade deck and the dining areas, the older couple was nowhere to be seen. It was as if they had never existed. Over the next 2 days, the search continued, but there was no sign of the missing couple. Their cabin was empty, their belongings untouched. No one on board could recall seeing them, except for Jennifer and Mark. By the time the ship reached its next port, the search was called off, and the authorities were notified. But the couple was never found, and the mystery of their disappearance remained unsolved. Jennifer and Mark finished their cruise, but the joy and excitement of the trip were gone. They couldn't shake the feeling that they had witnessed something otherworldly, something that couldn't be explained. Even after they returned home, the memory of the older couple haunted them, a lingering question that would never be answered. To this day, Jennifer wonders what happened to that couple. Were they lost at sea, victims of some tragic accident? Or were they something else entirely? Ghosts, perhaps, reliving their final moments on an endless loop? She'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. That cruise left her with a story she'll never forget. A story that still sends shivers down her spine whenever she thinks about it. Story 3, The Disappearing Crew. Our final story takes place on a cruise ship traveling through the remote and icy waters of Alaska. This is the story of David, a seasoned sailor and cruise ship enthusiast who had been on dozens of cruises in his lifetime. But nothing could have prepared him for what he would encounter on this particular voyage. David had always been fascinated by the wilderness of Alaska, the vast, untamed landscapes, the majestic wildlife, and the sense of isolation drew him in. So, when he saw an opportunity to book a 2-week cruise through the Alaskan Inside Passage, he jumped at the chance. The ship, a mid-sized vessel with a reputation for its knowledgeable crew and intimate atmosphere, promised an unforgettable experience. The journey began smoothly. The ship glided through the calm waters, past towering glaciers and snow-capped mountains. The air was crisp and cold, but the views were breathtaking. David spent his days on deck, watching for whales and eagles, and his evenings enjoying the ship's gourmet meals and lively entertainment. But as the ship ventured deeper into the wilderness, the atmosphere began to change. It started with small, almost imperceptible things. The usually friendly and chatty crew members became more reserved, their smiles fading into blank expressions. David noticed that they seemed to be whispering to each other more often, casting furtive glances at the passengers as if they were hiding something. At first, David brushed it off, thinking it was just the stress of the job or perhaps fatigue from the long days at sea. But then, the disappearances began. It started with one of the waiters, a young man named Alex who had served David several times in the dining room. David noticed that Alex wasn't around one evening and assumed he had the night off. But the next day, Alex was still missing. When David asked one of the other waiters where Alex was, he was met with a vague response about Alex feeling unwell. A few days later, another crew member went missing, a woman named Sarah who worked at the reception desk. David had spoken to her several times, and she had always been friendly and professional. But now, she was gone, and the other crew members didn't seem to have a clear answer as to where she had gone. David's concern grew as more and more crew members seemed to disappear. By the end of the first week, at least 5 crew members were unaccounted for. The remaining crew were tight-lipped, offering no explanations, their faces betraying a growing sense of unease. One evening, David decided to confront the ship's captain, a stern and experienced man named Captain Harrison. He found the captain in his quarters, poring over charts and logs. David voiced his concerns, asking about the missing crew members and whether there was something wrong on the ship. Captain Harrison looked up from his charts, his face grave. "Mr. Davis," he began, his voice low and measured, "I assure you, everything is under control. The crew members you're concerned about have been reassigned to other duties. There's nothing to worry about." But David wasn't convinced. The captain's words felt rehearsed, like he was hiding something, and there was something in his eyes, a flicker of fear that belied his calm demeanor. That night, David couldn't sleep. He lay in his cabin, listening to the creaks and groans of the ship as it moved through the dark waters. There was an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional distant sound. A door closing, footsteps in the hall, a faint whisper carried on the wind. David's unease grew, a knot of tension tightening in his chest. In the early hours of the morning, David decided to go for a walk, hoping to clear his mind. The ship was eerily quiet as he made his way to the upper deck. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, and the only light came from the ship's dim running lights, casting long shadows across the deck. As David walked, he noticed something strange. One of the lifeboats, usually secured tightly to the side of the ship, was missing. The ropes that held it in place were frayed, as if they had been cut. David's heart began to race. Had someone tried to leave the ship? Or had something else happened? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise. A soft thud, followed by a scraping sound, like something being dragged. David turned towards the sound, his eyes straining to see in the darkness. He could just make out a figure moving near the stern of the ship, dragging something heavy. As he approached, the figure came into view. It was one of the crew members, a burly man named Tom who worked in the engine room. Tom was dragging a large, heavy sack, leaving a dark trail behind him on the deck. David's breath caught in his throat as he realized the trail wasn't just water. It was blood. "Tom!" David called out, his voice trembling. Tom froze, his back still turned to David. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, Tom turned to face him. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Stay back," Tom whispered, his voice hoarse. "You don't know what's happening here. You don't want to know." But David couldn't just walk away. He took a step closer, trying to understand what was going on. "What's in the sack, Tom? What are you doing?" Tom's hands tightened around the sack, his knuckles white. "They're coming for us," he said, his voice barely audible. "They're taking us one by one. The captain knows, but he can't stop it. No one can. We're all doomed." David's mind raced. Who was coming? What was happening? Before he could ask more, Tom suddenly turned and hoisted the sack over the railing, letting it drop into the dark waters below. Without another word, he walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Shaken, David leaned over the railing, staring into the black abyss where the sack had disappeared. He knew he needed to get off the ship, but they were days away from the next port, and the lifeboats were the only escape. As he stood there, he felt a cold dread wash over him, the realization that whatever was happening on the ship was far beyond his understanding. The next morning, the ship's atmosphere was even more tense. The remaining crew members were visibly shaken, and there was a noticeable increase in security on board. David tried to speak to the captain again, but Captain Harrison was nowhere to be found. Rumors began to circulate among the passengers, whispers of strange occurrences, of people disappearing in the night. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ship arrived at its next port. As soon as the gangplank was lowered, David grabbed his belongings and hurried off the ship, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't look back. When he reached the safety of the port, he contacted the authorities, recounting everything he had witnessed. But when they boarded the ship to investigate, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The crew members who had disappeared were simply unaccounted for, and the captain maintained that everything was under control. But David knew the truth. Something had been on that ship with them, something that had taken the crew members, leaving no trace behind. And even though he was back on solid ground, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't finished. David never set foot on a cruise ship again. The memories of that voyage, of the missing crew members and the dark secrets that were never fully uncovered, haunted him for the rest of his life. He would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing the sound of footsteps in the hall, the soft thud of something being dragged, and the whispered warnings of a doomed man. And he knew, deep down, that the sea held more mysteries than he could ever imagine, dark, terrifying mysteries that were better left undiscovered. These stories remind us that even the most idyllic settings can harbor unimaginable horrors. Whether it's the deep waters of the ocean, the isolated beauty of the Alaskan wilderness, or the close quarters of a cruise ship, danger can lurk just beneath the surface, waiting to strike when you least expect it.
If you have enjoyed watching this video and are a fan of horror stories and scary things like this, please subscribe and comment down below any suggestions as to what you would like to see on this channel. Thank you for watching and have a good day.